The field stretched endlessly under twin suns, golden grain swaying in waves that looked like an ocean made of light. Lyra walked between the rows with her daughter Nessa, both carrying baskets filled with the morning harvest. This was how life had always been on Refuge. Peaceful, simple, safe. Nessa laughed as she chased a flutterwing through the crops, her small hands reaching for the creature that danced just beyond her grasp. Lyra smiled, watching her child play without worry or fear. The Varani people had built their civilization on these principles. No weapons, no armies, just cooperation and trust that the universe would leave them in peace. That trust shattered when the sky turned dark at midday. Lyra looked up, shielding her eyes from the suns. Ships descended through the atmosphere, hundreds of them, their hulls black as burnt metal. They moved in formation, blocking out the light as they passed overhead. The grain stopped swaying. The flutterwings disappeared. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. "Mama, what are those?" Nessa asked, her voice small and frightened. Lyra had no answer. The Varani had no military, no defenses, no experience with invasion. They barely understood the concept. She grabbed her daughter's hand and ran toward the settlement, her basket forgotten in the dirt. By the time they reached the town center, panic had already spread. Varani families clustered together, looking at the sky where more ships continued to arrive. The settlement elder, Garen, stood on the speaking platform, his face pale with shock. "We are sending distress calls," he announced, his voice shaking. "The coalition will help us. They must help us." But even as he spoke, the first landing craft touched down at the edge of town. Massive ramps dropped open and warriors poured out, each one larger than any Varani, covered in armor that looked like it was made from scavenged ships and bones. They carried weapons that hummed with deadly energy. These were the Ravagers. Lyra had heard stories about them, whispered tales from traders who traveled beyond Varani space. They were a nomadic culture that survived by taking what they needed from others. They stripped entire worlds of resources and moved on, leaving nothing behind but ruins. The first plasma blast hit the granary, turning it into a fireball that sent burning embers raining down on the settlement. Varani screamed and scattered, running in all directions. Lyra clutched Nessa close, searching for somewhere to hide, anywhere to keep her daughter safe. "Bring everything of value to the collection points." A voice boomed across the settlement, translated through crude speakers mounted on Ravager armor. "Resist and die. Comply and live. You have one rotation to decide." Lyra ran with Nessa toward the shelter tunnels beneath the meeting hall. Other families had the same idea, cramming into the narrow passages designed for weather emergencies, not war. Children cried. Adults tried to comfort them, while fear showed plain on every face. In the darkness below ground, Garen activated the communication array, sending out desperate messages on every frequency the Varani knew. He broadcast their location, their situation, their plea for help. "This is Refuge Colony on the fourth planet of the Halcyon system. We are under attack by Ravager forces. We have no military capability. We are civilians, farmers, families. Please, if anyone can hear this, we need help. We are dying. Please help us." The message repeated over and over, sent into the void of space, hoping someone would listen. Hours passed in the tunnels. Above ground, the sounds of destruction continued. Explosions, the crash of buildings falling, the harsh laughter of Ravagers as they looted and burned. Some Varani tried to comply, bringing out their possessions, only to be beaten anyway for sport. Lyra held Nessa in the dark, humming an old lullaby to drown out the sounds of their world ending. Other parents did the same, creating a sad chorus of songs meant to soothe children who were learning that the universe was not kind. Garen continued broadcasting. His voice grew hoarse, but he never stopped. The distress call went out again and again, bouncing off relay stations, spreading across known space. Most civilizations ignored it. The Varani had nothing to offer in return for military aid. Some sent messages of sympathy, but no ships. The Coalition Council convened an emergency session and debated for hours while Refuge burned. They discussed the political implications, the cost of intervention, the precedent it would set. In the end, they voted to condemn the violence, but take no action. The Varani were alone. Then, on the third day of occupation, as Ravager forces prepared to strip the planet of every resource before moving to the next target, a single response came through on the emergency channel. The signal was strong, the voice clear and determined. Refuge Colony, this is the human vessel Defiant. We receive your distress call. Help is coming. Fortify your positions and protect your people. We will be there in 4 days. Hold on. Garen stared at the communication panel, not recognizing the language until the translator caught up. Umans. He had never heard of them. Most Varani had not. They were from some distant corner of space, unknown to the Coalition, unaffiliated with any major power. For days, Lyra whispered when Garen shared the news. Can we last 4 days? Nobody knew. But for the first time since the sky turned dark, they had something besides fear. They had hope that someone was coming, that someone had heard their cry and answered. Above ground, the Ravagers continued their work, unaware that a storm was building in the void between stars, racing toward them at speeds that defied standard hyperspace calculations. The humans were coming, and they were coming fast. 3 days felt like 3 years in the tunnels beneath Haven's Rest. The settlement that once held 5,000 Varani now sheltered less than half that number. The others were either dead or captured by Ravagers for slave labor in the mines they had opened across the planet's surface. Nessa slept fitfully against her mother's chest, her breathing shallow from the stale air. The environmental systems in the tunnels were never meant to support this many people for this long. Carbon dioxide levels were rising. Food was running out. Some of the elders had already started talking about surrender. Lyra refused to consider it. Somewhere out in the darkness of space, help was coming. She had to believe that on the surface, Ravager Warlord Hawkins surveyed his prize from the command deck of his flagship. Refuge was proving more profitable than expected. The soil was rich with minerals his people could trade. The grain could feed his fleet for months. The Varani themselves would make decent laborers until they broke. Then they would be discarded like any other tool. Warlord, we are detecting hyperspace signatures at the system's edge, one of his officers reported. Hawken barely glanced at the display. Probably Coalition observers coming to watch and do nothing, as they always did. The weak civilizations of the galaxy had rules about intervention, treaties about sovereignty. Those rules kept predators like him well-fed. How many ships? He asked, more from boredom than concern. 17 vessels. Unknown configuration. They are not in our database. That got his attention. Hawken pulled up the sensor data and frowned. The ships were smaller than standard Coalition military vessels, but they were fast. Very fast. They had crossed the outer system in half the time his own ships could manage. Hail them, he ordered. Let us see who has come to watch. There was no response to his hail. The unknown ships simply continued their approach, accelerating to combat speed. Hawken felt the first twinge of unease. These newcomers were not observing. They were attacking. Battle stations, he commanded. Launch fighters and prepare to engage. His fleet scrambled to respond, but they were caught off guard. Most of his ships were in orbit or on the surface, their crews busy with looting operations. Only a dozen Ravager vessels were in position to intercept the approaching force. The engagement began at extreme range. The unknown ships opened fire with weapons that punched through Ravager shields like they were made of paper. 3 of his vessels exploded in the first volley, torn apart by focused energy beams that struck with surgical precision. Return fire, Hawken roared. Destroy them. His ships obeyed, filling space with plasma bolts and missile salvos. But the enemy ships moved like nothing he had ever seen. They rolled, dove, and weaved through the barrage, their movements impossible for vessels their size. Only one took damage, and even that ship kept fighting in the tunnels below Haven's Rest. Garen's communication panel lit up with activity. He scrambled to interpret the signals, his hands shaking. They are here, he said, his voice cracking. The humans are here. They're fighting the Ravagers in orbit. The Varani crowded around him, desperate for good news. Lyra pushed through to see the display, showing ship movements above their planet. 17 blue markers engaged dozens of red ones. As she watched, another red marker disappeared. "Are they winning?" someone asked. "I think so," Garen said, hardly believing his own words. Above the planet, Hakan watched his fleet being systematically destroyed. These humans fought with a combination of precision and aggression he had never encountered. They targeted weapons first, crippling ships before destroying them. They used the planet's gravity well to slingshot around obstacles. They covered each other with interlocking fields of fire that left no gaps. "Who are these people?" he demanded. His tactical officer pulled up what little information they had. The translator identifies them as human. Origin, point unknown. "We have no records of contact or conflict with this species." "Well, now we do," Hakan growled. "Recall all surface forces. We are leaving this world." But the humans had already anticipated his retreat. 6 of their ships broke formation and positioned themselves between the Ravager fleet and the hyperspace jump point. The message was clear. Nobody was leaving. Ground forces reported new contacts. Human landing craft were descending through the atmosphere, ignoring the plasma fire from surface batteries. Ravager commanders reported that the human ships seemed designed to withstand punishment that would cripple normal vessels. Hakan watched one human landing craft take a direct hit from a heavy plasma cannon. The ship's hull glowed white-hot, armor plating melting away, but it did not stop. It did not even slow down. It crashed directly into the Ravager position, its ramp dropping even as the hull cooled, and soldiers poured out shooting. The reports from the ground became frantic. Human soldiers moved through Ravager positions like they had trained for this exact scenario their entire lives. They used cover efficiently, coordinated their fire perfectly, and showed no hesitation even when outnumbered. Worse, they seemed to know exactly where the Varani were hiding and avoided those areas with their heaviest weapons. Point one Ravager captain sent a video feed. It showed a human soldier, smaller than a Ravager, but covered in armor that looked simple compared to their ornate gear. The human carried a rifle that fired solid projectiles, primitive compared to plasma weapons, but devastatingly effective. The soldier moved from position to position, each shot precise, each movement calculated. "They fight like they were born for it," the captain reported before his transmission cut off. Hakan realized with growing horror that he had made a terrible mistake. Refuge was not an easy target. It was bait, and he had taken IT.I in the tunnels. The Varani heard new sounds, different explosions, different weapons. The fighting was getting closer, but Garen was smiling. "They're pushing the Ravagers back," he said. "The humans are winning." Lyra held Nessa tighter, hardly daring to hope. Could it be true? Could these strangers actually save them? Above, another Ravager ship died in flames. The humans pressed their advantage relentlessly, giving no quarter, showing no mercy to those who had shown none to the Varani. The storm had arrived, and it was drowning the Ravagers in thunder. The first human that Lyra saw did not look like a warrior from legend. He was tired, covered in dust and blood that was not his own, and he moved with the careful efficiency of someone who had been fighting for hours without rest. His armor was scarred and dented. His face, visible through a cracked helmet visor, showed perhaps 30 years of life and eyes much older. "Is anyone injured?" he asked in perfect Varani, though his accent was strange. The refugees in the tunnel stared at him in silence. This was their savior? This exhausted soldier who looked ready to collapse? Then they saw what was behind him. A squad of human soldiers forming a protective perimeter, their weapons pointed outward, ready to die before letting anything reach the civilians they had come to protect. One was applying medical supplies to a wounded Varani who had been shot trying to escape a Ravager work camp. Another was distributing water and ration packs, moving efficiently despite obvious fatigue. "My name is Owen Grant," the first soldier said. "We are here to help. Can you tell me how many civilians are in this shelter?" Garen stepped forward, still shaking from hours of fear. 2,314, mostly families, children, elders. "We have wounded who need medical attention." Owen nodded and spoke into his communication device. Command, this is Grant. We have located Shelter 7. Approximately 2,300 civilians, multiple wounded, requesting immediate medical support and defensive reinforcements. The response came instantly. Copy that, Grant. Medics inbound. Hold that position. Lyra watched as more humans arrived. Some wore different armor marked with red crosses. They carried medical equipment and began treating the wounded with practiced skill. They moved among the Varani with gentleness that seemed impossible from soldiers who had just fought their way through Ravager forces. The doctor, Simon Hall, knelt beside Nessa, who was coughing from the bad air. He smiled at the child, his expression kind despite the exhaustion in his eyes. Hey there, little one. Can you take a deep breath for me? He held up a small device that hummed softly. This will help you breathe better. Nessa looked at her mother for permission. Lyra nodded, not trusting her voice. The doctor administered the treatment, and within seconds, Nessa's breathing eased. Color returned to her cheeks. Thank you, Lyra whispered. Thank you for coming. Dr. Hall met her eyes, and she saw pain there. We should have been here sooner. We should have been here before any of you suffered. You came, Lyra said. That is more than anyone else did. Outside, the battle for Haven's Rest continued. Captain Beth Reyes flew her fighter through a storm of enemy fire, her wingmen tight on her flanks. They had pushed the Ravagers back from the civilian centers, but Haken had called in reinforcements. 3 more Ravager battle groups had arrived, tripling the enemy forces. The odds did not favor the humans. They were outnumbered nearly 4-1 now, and Ravager ships were tough despite their lack of finesse. But Beth had not traveled across half the galaxy to lose now. Delta Wing, Hardport, Echo Wing, cover the supply ships. We cannot let them reach the surface installations. Her people responded instantly, executing maneuvers that pushed their ships to the limit. Human vessels were designed by people who had learned warfare over thousands of years of history, refined through countless conflicts, and built to be operated by a species that refused to accept defeat. On his flagship, Haken watched his reinforcements arrive and felt confidence return. Surely numbers would tell. Surely these humans would break under overwhelming force. That he was wrong. The human ships adapted to the new threat with frightening speed. They changed formations, shifted tactics, and continued to tear through his vessels with brutal efficiency. Every shot they fired seemed to find a weak point. Every maneuver put them in the perfect position. It was like fighting an enemy who could see the future. On the ground, Owen's squad held the perimeter around Shelter 7 while evacuations began. The humans had brought transport ships that could carry civilians to safety aboard the human fleet. But moving 2,000 refugees while under fire required time they did not have. But a Ravager assault team tried to break through the human lines. They were met with concentrated fire from soldiers who never seemed to miss. Owen moved through the chaos like it was choreographed, his rifle barking short control bursts, each one dropping an enemy. A massive Ravager warrior charged at him, screaming a battle cry, swinging a blade designed to cut through armor. Owen sidestepped, letting the blade pass within inches, and shot the warrior 3 times in rapid succession. The Ravager fell. Nessa watched from the shelter entrance, her small hand gripping her mother's. Mama, are they going to protect us? Lyra looked at Owen, who had positioned himself between the shelter and the most dangerous approach angle. He was bleeding from a wound in his side, but had not slowed down. Every human soldier she could see fought the same way, like the civilians behind them were family worth dying for. Yes, little one, Lyra said. They will protect us. Admiral Dante Cross coordinated the entire operation from his command ship, the Defiant. Reports flowed in from all fronts. Space battle update. Ground team status. Civilian evacuation progress. Casualty reports. He processed it all with the calm of a man who had done this before, who knew that showing fear would spread through his forces like poison. Admiral, enemy reinforcements are pressing our orbital defense grid. We are holding, but we cannot maintain this indefinitely. Cross studied the tactical display. His fleet was winning, but the cost was climbing. 3 human ships had been damaged badly enough to pull back. 67 soldiers wounded. 12 dead. Each loss felt like a knife to his heart. but he could not afford to hesitate. All ships, execute Formation Delta. Draw them away from the planet and into the debris field. We will use the terrain against them. His captains acknowledged, and the fleet moved as one. The Ravagers followed, thinking they were chasing a retreating enemy. Instead, they were being led into a trap. Below, the first transport loaded with Varani refugees lifted off under heavy escort. Owen watched it go, allowing himself a small smile. They were getting people out. They were saving lives. That was why they had come. Observer Talus had been sent by the Coalition Council to document the situation at refuge. His species, the scholarly Netherin, prided themselves on objective analysis and detailed record-keeping. He had witnessed 17 military conflicts in his career, but nothing had prepared him for what he saw humans do. His observation ship maintained a safe distance from the battle, sensors recording everything. The data streaming across his displays defied standard combat doctrine. Human ships took damage that should have destroyed them and kept fighting. Human soldiers operated in environmental conditions that would incapacitate most species. They coordinated across vast distances with a precision that suggested hive mind communication. Yet his scans showed they were all individuals making independent decisions. Talus began researching human origins while watching the battle unfold. What he found disturbed him deeply. Earth, a Class 12 Deathworld, the highest danger rating in the galactic database. A planet where 90% of explored species would die within days from environmental hazard alone. Gravity 20% higher than galactic standard. Atmospheric oxygen levels that would be toxic to many species over extended periods. Weather patterns violent enough to flatten cities. Tectonic activity that regularly reshaped continents. An ecosystem where nearly everything had evolved to kill or consume everything else. And humans had not just survived there. They had thrived. They had built civilizations. They had reached for the stars. By the ancestors, Talus whispered. They are apex predators wearing friendly faces. But that did not explain the contradiction he observed. Yes, humans fought with terrifying efficiency, but they also threw themselves in front of Varani civilians to shield them from harm. They shared their rations with refugees. They treated enemy wounded after battles. They were capable of extreme violence and extreme compassion, sometimes in the same moment. It made no sense to Talus's orderly mind that on refuge. Owen helped an elderly Varani man into a transport ship. The man's leg was injured, broken during a Ravager raid. Owen carried him as gently as possible, ignoring his own wounds. Why? The old Varani asked in a weak voice. Why do you fight for us? We are strangers to you. Owen settled him into a seat and secured the safety harness. Because you needed help, he said simply. Because we could come and others would not. Because it was the right thing to do. But you're dying for us. Your people are dying. Owen looked away, thinking of the soldiers he had lost. Good people. Friends. Yeah, we are. But that is what we do. We protect those who cannot protect themselves. The old man touched Owen's hand. Your people are either the bravest in the galaxy or the most foolish. Probably both, Owen said with a tired smile. Above the planet, Beth Reyes led her wing through the debris field where Admiral Cross had lured the Ravager reinforcements. The broken remains of old stations and destroyed ships created a maze of metal and ice. Human pilots, who had grown up playing simulation games and flying in conditions that ranged from clear skies to hurricane winds, navigated it easily. The Ravagers, who relied on open space tactics and overwhelming firepower, struggled. Their larger ships could not maneuver between the debris. Their sensors were confused by all the metal. Human fighters picked them apart piece by piece. Hakan watched his fleet dying and felt something he had not experienced in decades. Fear. Real cold fear. These humans were not just winning. They were dominating. They fought like they had been born in war and raised in fire. That he pulled up the analysis his tactical computers had compiled on human combat performance. The results were staggering. Human reaction times were double the galactic average. Their ability to function under stress exceeded any species on record. They could operate with injuries that would put other species into shock. They seem to have no limit to their endurance. Find out where they come from, Hakan ordered. I want to know everything about these humans. The report came back quickly. His intelligence officers had access coalition databases. What they found made Hakan's blood run cold. Earth was not just a death world. It was legendary, even among death worlds. A planet so hostile that xenobiologists had argued nothing sentient could evolve there. A world where humans had not faced one predator, but thousands. Where they had not faced one challenge, but millions. Where their very evolution had been a war for survival every single day. Humans had invented warfare before they invented agriculture. They had fought each other for resources, territory, ideology, and sometimes for no reason except they had forgotten why the fight started. Thousands of years of conflict had refined them into perfect warriors, but the report also showed something else. Humans had also invented medicine, philosophy, art, and music while fighting. They had learned to cooperate, to build, to create beauty in the middle of horror. They had gone from tribal warfare to space exploration in a geological eye blink. They were survivors who had chosen to become protectors. Warlord, the humans are broadcasting on all channels, his communications officer reported. Hakan listened to the message. Admiral Cross's voice was calm, measured, and absolutely certain. Ravager forces, you have one opportunity to surrender. Withdraw from refuge immediately. Release all prisoners. Cease all hostile action. Do this now, or we will destroy every ship in your fleet. You have 10 minutes to decide. Hakan laughed bitterly. 10 minutes to abandon a prize he had spent weeks claiming. 10 minutes to admit defeat to a species he had never heard of until 3 days ago that he looked at his tactical display. Half his fleet was gone. His ground forces were in full retreat. His reinforcements were trapped in a debris field being hunted by human fighters. He had no good options. Send the surrender signal, he said quietly. His officers stared at him in shock. Ravagers did not surrender. Ravagers fought to the death. Do it now, Hakan roared. Before they kill us all. Below, Owen heard the news over his communication channel. The Ravagers were pulling back. The battle was over. They had won. He sat down heavily, his legs suddenly unable to support him. Around him, other soldiers did the same. Some laughed. Some cried. Some just sat in silence, processing what they had done and what it had cost. Nessa ran to Owen and hugged him. The soldier, who had killed dozens of enemies without hesitation, held the small child gently and let her tears soak into his armor. You saved us, she whispered. Yeah, Owen said. We did. Hakan stood in shackles aboard the human ship Defiant, surrounded by guards who watched him with eyes that showed no fear. He was twice their size, a warrior who had conquered 12 worlds, and yet these small humans treated him like he was already defeated. Because he was... Admiral Cross entered the holding area, his uniform crisp despite days of combat. He studied Hakan for a long moment before speaking. You will be turned over to coalition authorities for trial. Every Varani you killed, every settlement you destroyed, every life you ruined will be accounted for. Hakan laughed, a bitter sound. The coalition has no teeth. They will debate for months and release me with a fine. Then we will find you again, Cross said simply. And next time, we will not accept surrender. The threat hung in the air. Hakan believed it completely. These humans had crossed vast distances to save people they did not know. They would certainly cross those same distances to ensure justice was done. What are you? Hakan asked. I have fought 100 species. None fight like you. Cross considered the question. We are what happens when a death world shapes a species for millions of years, and that species chooses to be better than their nature. We know violence because we lived it. We choose compassion because we survived it. He turned to leave, then paused. You wanted to know about humans? We are the species that looked at our own history of war and decided never again would we allow the strong to prey on the weak. When someone cries for help, we come. That is who we are. On refuge, the cleanup had begun. Human engineers worked alongside Varani volunteers to repair damaged infrastructure. Dr. Hall had set up a field hospital and was training Varani medical personnel in trauma care. They would need those skills to help survivors cope with what they had endured. Owen walked through Haven's Rest, surveying the damage. Entire blocks had been reduced to rubble. Scorch marks from plasma, fire blackened walls. Memorial stones already marked places where Varani had died defending their homes. Lyra found him standing in the town square, looking at a statue that had somehow survived the battle intact. It depicted a Varani farmer teaching a child to tend crops, a symbol of their peaceful culture. "Will it ever be the same?" she asked. Owen shook his head. "No, it will not. You cannot unsee what you have seen. You cannot forget what happened." "Then we have lost," Lyra said quietly. "No," Owen said firmly. "You survived. That matters. You will rebuild. You will remember the ones you lost. You will teach your children to be strong without losing their kindness. That is not losing. That is winning the hardest fight there is." Lyra watched him, this strange warrior who spoke like a philosopher. "What will you do now? Will you stay?" "We cannot," Owen said. "There are other distress calls. Other people who need help. We have to go. But what if the Ravagers come back?" Owen smiled. "They will not. Word is spreading about what happened here. Every pirate, warlord, and raider in this sector now knows that if they attack defenseless worlds, humans will come. And we do not forgive. We do not forget." On his observation ship, Talus compiled his report for the Coalition Council. The data was undeniable. Humans had achieved in 4 days what the Coalition had deemed impossible. They had defeated a Ravager fleet 3 times their size. They had saved over 2,000 civilians. They had done it with minimal collateral damage and had shown mercy to surrendering enemies. The implications were staggering. If humans could do this at Refuge, what else could they do? What if they decided the Coalition itself was too weak, too passive, too willing to let injustice happen in the name of political stability? Talus included his analysis of human psychology, their history, their capabilities. He noted that humans seemed to operate on a different moral framework than most species. They valued individual life highly, but were willing to sacrifice themselves for strangers. They were capable of great violence, but chose restraint whenever possible. They were, in his professional opinion, the most dangerous species he had ever encountered precisely because they were so difficult to predict. His final recommendation shocked even himself. The Coalition should extend immediate membership to humanity. Not because we want to, but because we cannot afford to have them operating independently. Better they are inside our systems, bound by our treaties, than outside where their sense of justice might conflict with our political realities. The Coalition Council convened an emergency session to hear Talus's report. Representatives from 47 species watched the combat footage in silence. They saw human ships moving with impossible grace. They saw human soldiers fighting with terrifying efficiency. They saw human medics treating Varani wounded with gentle care. Ambassador Sorrel of the Kethari spoke first. "They are deathworlders, predators. We invite them into our community at our peril. They are protectors," countered Ambassador Finn of the Drell. "They did what we should have done. They saved lives we condemned to death with our inaction." The debate raged for hours. Some feared human military power. Others admired human courage. All agreed that the galaxy had changed. A new player had entered the stage, and they were unlike anything that had come before dead on Refuge. The final transport ships prepared to depart. Admiral Cross addressed the Varani leadership from the Defiance Bridge. "You have our communication protocols. If you need help, call us. If you need supplies, call us. If you just need to talk to someone who understands, call us. You are not alone anymore." Garen, tears streaming down his face, thanked Cross and his entire fleet. "How can we ever repay you?" Cross smiled. "Pass it on. When you are strong again, when you have rebuilt, remember what it felt like to cry for help and have someone answer. If you ever find someone else in that position, be the ones who come. Be the ones who answer. That is how you repay us." The human fleet began its departure sequence. Varani families lined the streets, watching their saviors leave. Children waved. Adults saluted in the human style they had learned. Nessa held the drawing she had made for Owen, showing him as a hero with wings. The ships rose into the sky, their engines bright against the darkness. Lyra held her daughter and watched until they disappeared among the stars. "Will we see them again?" Nessa asked. "Maybe," Lyra said. "But even if we do not, we will never forget them." Above, the human fleet jumped to hyperspace, already responding to another distress call from another world in need. The storm had passed, but its echo would resound across the galaxy for generations to come. 6 months after the battle, Refuge looked different. New buildings stood where old ones had burned. Fields of grain swayed in the wind again, though memorial gardens now dotted the landscape, honoring those who had not survived. The Varani had learned to rebuild, and in rebuilding, they had changed. Lyra now served as a settlement coordinator, helping organize the reconstruction efforts. She had discovered strength she never knew she possessed. Every morning, she walked past the memorial stone bearing the names of the dead, including her brother and 3 cousins. Every morning, she promised them she would make their world beautiful again. Nessa attended the new school built with human assistance. The curriculum now included basic self-defense and emergency protocols, not to turn Varani into warriors, but to ensure they would never be helpless again. The children learned that peace was a choice that required strength to maintain. Dr. Hall had stayed for 3 months, training Varani doctors and leaving behind medical equipment that would serve the colony for years. Before departing, he told Lyra something she would never forget. "The worst thing about being a doctor in the military is arriving too late. We came as fast as we could, but people still died. I am sorry we could not save everyone." Lyra had hugged him then, this human who carried the weight of strangers on his shoulders. "You saved my daughter. You saved me. You gave us a future. That is enough." Now, standing in the town square rebuilt around that surviving statue, Lyra watched as workers installed a new monument. It depicted a human soldier kneeling before a Varani child, offering protection. The inscription read simply, "They came when we called." Across the galaxy, the story of Refuge had spread like wildfire. Every trade route, every communications hub, every diplomatic channel carried the tale of the humans who had crossed the void to answer a plea for help. The details varied in the retelling, but the core truth remained. The Ravager clans found themselves pariahs. Worlds they had targeted for raids suddenly had human observers in orbit. Pirates who once operated with impunity discovered that attacking civilian ships brought swift human response. The predators of the galaxy learned a new kind of fear that on Earth. Admiral Cross stood before the Global Defense Council, presenting his report on the Refuge operation. Faces from every continent watched via holographic projection, representing the unified government humanity had forged after centuries of conflict. "The Varani are recovering," Cross said. "Ravager Warlord Haken is in coalition custody awaiting trial. Our casualties were acceptable given the mission parameters. We lost 14 personnel, with 43 wounded. All wounded are expected to make full recovery." "And the political situation?" asked Council Chair Williams. "The coalition has extended formal recognition and has invited humanity to join as full members. They're still debating the terms, but the invitation itself represents a significant shift in galactic politics. Because they fear us." Cross nodded. "Some do. Others admire us. Most are confused by us. We do not fit into their frameworks. We are too aggressive to be passive observers, too compassionate to be conquerors, too independent to be easily controlled." "Good," Williams said. "Fear can be useful if tempered with respect. What is your recommendation moving forward?" "We continue as we have," Cross said. "We respond to distress calls. We protect the vulnerable. We demonstrate through action what humanity represents. Eventually, they will understand that we are not a threat to peace. We are its guardians." Observer Talus had been assigned as the Coalition's liaison to humanity. His first official visit to Earth had been eye-opening. The planet was everything the database said and worse. The gravity made movement exhausting. The oxygen levels left him lightheaded. The weather shifted from pleasant to potentially lethal in hours. And yet, humans walked through it like it was nothing. They thrived in conditions that required him to wear environmental support. Children played in parks where the local wildlife could kill a Netheran in seconds. They had built a global civilization on a world actively trying to kill them. You understand now, his human guide said. Her name was Rachel, a diplomatic officer assigned to help coalition representatives understand Earth. This is what shaped us. This is why we are the way we are. You could have become monsters, Talus said. With this evolutionary pressure, you should have become the most violent species in the galaxy. Rachel smiled. We almost did. Our history is full of terrible things we did to each other. Wars, genocides, atrocities that shame us even now. But we learned. We grew. We decided that surviving was not enough. We had to be worth surviving. She led him to a memorial in the city center. It bore names from conflicts spanning thousands of years. Millions of names. We remember what we were, so we never forget what we can become if we stop trying to be better. That is the real human story. Not that we can fight, that we choose when to fight and why. On refuge, Nessa ran through the grain fields with other children, their laughter carrying on the wind. She wore a small pendant around her neck, a gift from Owen before he left. It was a human military insignia, polished bright. What does it mean? She had asked him. It means that someone, somewhere, will always answer when you call for help, Owen had said. And someday, when you are strong enough, maybe you will be the one who answers. Nessa did not fully understand then. But as she grew, as she learned about the humans and their history, as she saw how her people had changed from victims to survivors, she began to grasp the meaning. The galaxy was not a safe place. It was full of predators and dangers, and those who would hurt the weak. But it was also full of protectors, guardians, and those who refused to let evil win without a fight. Humanity had shown the Varani that peaceful did not mean powerless. That kindness did not mean weakness. That choosing mercy was not the same as surrendering to violence. The distress beacon that had broadcast Refuge's cry for help now transmitted a different message, one that Garen had programmed personally. This is Refuge Colony. We stand. We remember. We honor those who came when we called. To all who face darkness, know that you are not alone. Help exists. Hope exists. The humans taught us this. We will not forget. The message traveled across light years, bouncing between relay stations, reaching civilizations old and new. Some heard it as a warning. Some heard it as a promise. Some heard it as simple truth. And somewhere in the darkness between stars, a human fleet picked up another distress call. Another world in danger. Another cry for help. Admiral Cross studied the message, calculated the jump coordinates, and gave the order his crews had heard many times before. All ships, prepare for hyperspace. We have people to save. The fleet jumped, racing toward those in need, carried by engines built by a species that refused to look away from suffering. They came like a storm, bringing thunder and lightning and the promise that darkness would not prevail. Because that was what humans did. They answered the call.